Standing in that delivery room, I saw the truth before she had the chance to lie again. A truth that shattered every promise we'd built. My name is Zeke Harrison, and I'm 33 years old. Each morning, I wake in the house I fought to keep, after my wife, Fatima Harrison, betrayed me with a child that clearly wasn't mine. For 5 years, I worked overtime, built a home, planned for a future with a woman who didn't hesitate to pass another man's child as mine. My mother Giselle warned me about Fatima's selfishness, but I defended her loyalty until evidence stared back at me from that hospital bassinet. I didn't scream or break things. Instead, I documented everything, froze accounts, and hired Adelina Ruiz, an attorney who understood what justice required. If you've ever watched your trust deliberately destroyed, you know the cold clarity that follows devastation. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. They placed her in Fatima's arms, wrapped in the standard hospital blanket, pink-faced and wailing. I stood frozen beside the bed, my congratulatory smile dying before it fully formed. The nurses bustled around, adjusting monitors and cooing at the newborn, oblivious to how the ground had just disappeared beneath my feet. "Beautiful baby girl," the nurse said, smiling. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, because that child, that tiny red-faced baby, looked nothing like me. Nothing. Not my nose, not my chin, not even a hint of the Harrison features my brother and I both inherited from our father. It was like staring at a stranger. Fatima's smile faltered when she saw my face. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked, her voice small. I took a step back. "Whose child is this, Fatima?" The room seemed to shrink, the beeping monitors suddenly too loud. A nurse glanced between us and quietly excused herself, closing the door with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot. "She's ours, Zeke." "What kind of question is that?" But her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Her fingers nervously adjusted the baby's blanket. Don't lie to me right now." My voice came out steady, surprising even myself. "This child doesn't look anything like me. Sometimes genes skip. Genes don't skip like that." I moved closer, looking down at the baby, then at my wife's face. "Tell me the truth. Right now." Fatima's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the baby tighter, as though I might snatch her away. The child whimpered, sensing the tension. It was a mistake," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A night out with the girls. I had too much to drink." It didn't mean anything. Each word hit like ice water. "Who?" I don't even know his name." Her voice cracked. "It was just one night, at that club downtown. I was drunk, and 9 months." I cut her off. "You've had 9 months to tell me this wasn't my child. 9 months of watching me paint the nursery, build the crib, talk to your stomach. 9 months of lies." The door opened behind me. I turned to see my mother, Giselle, standing there. One look at my face told her everything. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening as she took in the scene. "What's happening here?" It was Thomas Foster, Fatima's father, pushing past my mother into the room. Beth Foster followed, her face a mask of concern that quickly shifted as she caught the tension. "Ask your daughter," I said, my voice hollow. Thomas looked at Fatima, at the baby, then back at his daughter's tear-streaked face. "Fatima? It was a mistake. A night out." Fatima's voice trembled. "I don't even know his name." Thomas's face darkened. He slammed his fist against the metal bed rail, making the whole bed shake. "You disgraced yourself! Don't look to us for excuses." Beth stepped forward, her lips tight. "You've humiliated this family, Fatima. Don't expect us to shield you from this." Even Giselle, who rarely spoke harshly, said flatly, "Zeke, don't Don't you dare claim that child. It isn't ours. Fatima tried to sob her way out. It meant nothing. It just happened one night. Nothing? I cut her off. 9 months of lies, pretending it was mine, isn't nothing. That's betrayal with a calendar. The baby began to cry in earnest now, tiny fists waving. I looked down at her, this innocent child caught in her mother's web of deception. With careful movements, I reached down and adjusted the blanket that had slipped from her shoulder. I won't claim another man's child, I said quietly, and I won't stay in a marriage built on lies. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, past the nurse's station, past the new fathers proudly showing phone pictures, past the gift shop with its blue and pink balloons. I pushed through the hospital doors and stepped into the cold night air, finally letting myself take a full breath. What kind of war had I just stepped into? The next morning, I pulled into Zach's driveway with nothing but an overnight bag and the clothes on my back. I couldn't face going home, not to the house where Fatima and I had built what I thought was our future. Every corner would remind me of the lies. I sat in my car for a minute, watching the rain streak down the windshield. It matched my mood, gray, cold, relentless. When I finally stepped out, Zach was already at the door, concern etched across his face. "Hey, man," he said, pulling me into a hug as soon as I reached the porch. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," I replied, following him inside. The familiar smell of his house, coffee and that pine-scented cleaner he always used, hit me with an unexpected wave of comfort. Some things were still normal. Some things could still be counted on. Zach took my bag, setting it by the stairs. "You want to talk about it? Or you need a minute?" "Both, I think." I sank onto his couch, rubbing my hands over my face. "The baby isn't mine, Zach." Even saying it out loud felt like punching myself in the gut. Zach's expression shifted from concern to shock, then hardened into something else, anger on my behalf. "You're sure?" I nodded. One look was all it took, but then she admitted it. Some random guy at a club. She doesn't even know his name. Jesus Christ! Zach sat down heavily across from me. 9 months, and she never said a word? 9 months of watching me set up a nursery for a kid that isn't mine. My voice cracked slightly, and I had to take a deep breath. I can't go back to that house right now. Guest room's already made up. He didn't hesitate. Stay as long as you need. We'll figure this out. I thought about the mortgage, the joint accounts, the life I'd built. I don't even know where to start. "One step at a time," Zach said. The same thing he'd told me when we were kids learning to fish. "First step is getting some sleep. You look like you haven't closed your eyes since yesterday." I hadn't. Every time I tried, I saw Fatima's face, heard her confession replaying like a broken record. By mid-afternoon, Mom showed up with coffee and a determined look. She set the carrier down on Zach's kitchen table and pulled me into a fierce hug. "You listen to me, Ezekiel Harrison," she said, holding my face between her hands like she did when I was a kid. "That woman made her choice, and it wasn't you. It wasn't us. But we choose each other, and I am right here." I nodded, throat tight. "Thanks, Mom." "Thomas Foster called me this morning," she said, releasing me to pour the coffee. "He and Beth are absolutely mortified. They're not defending her. Somehow, that made it worse and better at the same time. Fatima was alone in that hospital room with a baby that wasn't mine, facing the consequences of her choices. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollow. "What are you going to do?" Zach asked, accepting the cup Mom handed him. "Divorce, obviously," I said. The word tasted bitter. But beyond that, I don't know. "You'll need a lawyer," Mom said firmly. "A good one. I've already made some calls." That was Giselle Harrison, practical to the core, already 3 steps ahead when the rest of us were still reeling. 4 days later, I was still at Zach's, still trying to wrap my head around my new reality, when the doorbell rang. A courier handed over a thick manila envelope addressed to me. I knew before opening it that this was the next battle. The first shots had been fired in the delivery room. This was the war. Inside was a legal notice from Fatima's attorney. As I scanned the document, my stomach tightened into knots. She was demanding child support. She had listed me as the presumed father, despite her own admission that the baby wasn't mine. She wanted temporary rights to our house, access to our joint bank accounts, and continued financial support while the divorce proceeded. I spread the papers across Zach's kitchen table, reading each page twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. The audacity was breathtaking. After betraying me, lying for 9 months, and admitting to everyone that the child wasn't mine, she was still trying to trap me. Zach leaned over my shoulder, reading along. She can't be serious. Dead serious. I tapped the attorney's letterhead. This isn't some bargain basement lawyer either. But you're not the father. She admitted it. Doesn't matter in some states. If we're married when the baby is born, I could be on the hook regardless. I looked up at my brother. The weight of what I was facing suddenly crystal clear. If I don't fight this now, I'll be paying for her mistake until I'm 50. Adelina Ruiz didn't look like she suffered fools. Her office was clean, minimal, with degrees on the wall and not a single personal photo. Just the way it should be. I didn't need a family attorney. I needed a shark. Start from the beginning, she said, pen poised over a yellow legal pad. My wife gave birth 4 days ago. Baby isn't mine. The words came easier each time I said them, like the pain was getting compartmentalized. She admitted it in the delivery room, said it was some guy at a club. Doesn't even know his name. Adelina didn't flinch. And now? I slid the legal notice across her desk. Now she wants child support, temporary rights to our house, and access to our joint accounts. She scanned the document, her expression unchanged. Do you have joint credit cards? 2. I pulled the statements from my folder. And bank statements. Last 6 months. Her eyebrow raised slightly as she flipped through them. Mr. Harrison, do you go clubbing often? Never. That's all her. These charges, Skyline Lounge, Velvet Room, Cloud 9, they're all during her pregnancy? I nodded. She said they were yoga classes, girls' nights. Late yoga, she called it. The memory twisted in my gut like a knife. How stupid was I? You weren't stupid. You trusted your wife. She set the statements aside. What else do you have? I handed over more papers, mortgage statements, investment accounts, car loans, everything I'd built over the last decade. Here's what we're going to do, Adelina said, leaning forward. First, we demand a DNA test. That's non-negotiable. Second, we freeze the joint accounts immediately. Third, we document every purchase she's made during this pregnancy that wasn't for your household or legitimate medical expenses. And if the test confirms what we already know, then we fight any presumed fatherhood claim. We counter for divorce on grounds of adultery. And we protect your assets. She tapped my credit card statements. These club charges, they're evidence of reckless spending, possibly even the location of her infidelity. I felt something cold and focused settle in my chest. This wasn't about hurt anymore. This was about survival. How fast can we move? I'll file today. But Mr. Harrison, she fixed me with a steady gaze. Be prepared. This will get personal, nasty. Are you ready for that? I'm ready. That evening, Zach and I sat on the floor of his guest room, bank statements spread around us like fallen leaves. Each highlighted line was another betrayal. Look at this. Zach pointed at a charge from 4 months ago. $200 at Skyline Lounge. That's when she was, 5 months pregnant? I nodded, remembering how she'd come home late that night, claiming a friend's birthday dinner ran long. I'd made her tea and rubbed her swollen feet while she smiled at me. The memory made me want to throw up. And here, I tapped another statement. Club charges every other weekend for the last 3 months. plus cash withdrawals I never knew about. She was living a double life, Zach said quietly, while I was painting the nursery. I closed my eyes briefly, then refocused. Keep looking. We need everything. Across town, Fatima was facing her own reckoning. I didn't see it, but Zach's girlfriend did. She worked at the hospital and overheard the Fosters arguing with Fatima as she was being discharged. According to her, Thomas Foster stood rigid by the door, refusing to help carry the baby carrier or Fatima's bag. "You made this mess," he'd said coldly. "You can figure out how to clean it up." Beth Foster had been even more direct. "Don't expect to move back home. We won't have this situation under our roof." Fatima had clutched the baby carrier, reality finally hitting her. No husband, no home to return to, parents who'd abandoned her, a newborn whose father was a nameless stranger. My phone rang just after 11 that night. Adelina Ruiz's number. "We filed the motion," she said without preamble. "The court will decide if you're the father. If you're not ready, this can get ugly fast." "I'm ready," I told her, staring at the ceiling of Zach's guest room. "Good, because tomorrow we freeze the accounts." The courthouse waiting room smelled like lemon cleaner and desperation. I sat beside Adelina, her leather portfolio balanced on her knee, watching the minute hand tick forward on the wall clock. My tie felt too tight, but I resisted the urge to loosen it. Across the room, Fatima cradled the baby against her chest, gently bouncing to keep it quiet. She wore a cream-colored dress that made her look innocent, calculated, I was sure. Her parents sat several chairs away, a physical gap that spoke volumes. Thomas Foster stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, while Beth kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor, her purse clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Remember," Adelina whispered, "let me do the talking. Stay calm no matter what she claims." I nodded, counting breaths like I used to before diving into cold lake water as a kid. 1, 2, 3. A bailiff appeared at the door. "Harrison and Harrison?" "Judge Winters will see you now." The courtroom felt smaller than I expected, more cramped than the grand spaces you see on TV. Judge Winters, a woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up as we filed in. "Let's get straight to it," she said after preliminaries. "Mrs. Harrison is seeking child support and household access pending divorce proceedings. Mr. Harrison contests paternity. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Adelina replied. "My client has reason to believe he is not the biological father, as acknowledged by Mrs. Harrison herself." Fatima's attorney, a balding man with an expensive suit and a permanent frown, stepped forward. "Your Honor, regardless of biological connection, Mr. Harrison is the presumed father under state law. The child was born during the marriage. A DNA test," Judge Winters interrupted, "seems the obvious first step here. I'm ordering testing before we discuss any financial arrangements." Relief flooded through me. At least someone was being logical. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I understand we have family members present who wish to testify?" Thomas Foster stood first, his back military straight. When sworn in, his voice carried the weight of decades of respected community standing. "Your Honor, I'm here to state clearly that my daughter's situation is entirely of her own making." He didn't look at Fatima once. "She has admitted to her mother and me that this child was conceived during an encounter with a man whose name she doesn't even know. This recklessness has disgraced our family, but more importantly, it would be a grave injustice to hold Mr. Harrison responsible." Fatima made a small sound, half sob, half protest, but Thomas continued, "We cannot and will not support attempts to trap Mr. Harrison into financial obligations for a child that is demonstrably not his." Beth Foster didn't testify. She simply sat with her head bowed, shame radiating from her rigid posture. When Giselle took the stand, her eyes met mine briefly, before she faced the judge. "Your Honor, my son is an honest man who deserved better than this deception." Fatima admitted to all of us, in the hospital room, that she had been unfaithful and that the baby isn't Zeke's. It would be unconscionable to force him to financially support a child from her betrayal. The judge looked thoughtful, making notes before speaking. "We'll reconvene after the DNA results. Until then, Mr. Harrison may access his personal belongings from the marital home accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. Joint accounts will remain frozen except for documented medical expenses for the infant. Next hearing in 2 weeks." The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot. That night, back at Zach's, I finally allowed myself to breathe. We sat on his back deck, beers in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky. "First round went well," Zach said. "Yeah." I took a long pull from my bottle. "Adelina thinks the DNA test will come back in about a week. Once that's official, it's just a matter of disentangling everything else." How'd Fatima look? Lost. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition of how completely she'd destroyed her own life. Her parents won't even sit next to her. The doorbell rang early the next morning. Zach answered while I poured coffee, still half asleep. "Zeke," he called, voice tight. "It's for you." A process server stood in the doorway, looking bored. "Ezekiel Harrison? I have paperwork for you." The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands. Inside was an emergency restraining order. "This can't be right," I muttered, scanning the document. But there it was in black and white. Fatima Harrison was claiming I had verbally abused and threatened her during childbirth, creating fear for her safety and the safety of her newborn. She'd sworn under oath that I had screamed at her, made threatening gestures, and created such a hostile environment that she feared for her life. Complete fiction. A desperate countermove. I sank onto Zach's couch, restraining order clutched in my hand. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me. "She's trying to bury me alive," I whispered. "We need to address this restraining order immediately," Adelina said, spreading documents across her desk the next morning. Her normally composed demeanor had been replaced with fierce determination. "This is a desperate tactic, but we can't ignore it." I nodded, the paper coffee cup trembling slightly in my hand. "What's our move?" "Evidence collection." She started writing a list. "First, we retrieve hospital security footage showing your actual behavior during and after the birth. Second, we request the nurse's notes from that day. They document everything. Third, your doorbell camera at home would have timestamps showing exactly when you arrived after leaving the hospital. I also have text messages to Zach right after I left," I added. "Perfect. We'll need all of it." Adelina looked up, her eyes sharp. "The more documentation we provide showing your calm demeanor, the more obvious her lie becomes. Courts don't look kindly on false restraining orders." The next 3 days blurred together in a scramble for evidence. I dug through my phone, extracting every message, call log, and location timestamp from that day. Zach combed through his security system footage, showing me arriving at his place looking devastated, but controlled. No rage, no violence. I remembered the summer Fatima and I painted the kitchen together, both of us laughing when she accidentally striped my hair blue. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. Giselle provided a detailed witness statement describing how I had gently adjusted the baby's blanket before quietly leaving the room. "I was watching my son's face the entire time," she wrote. "He showed pain and betrayal, but never anger or threatening behavior." Zach handed over his phone records, showing a 17-minute call with me that started precisely when I left the hospital, the exact time Fatima claimed I was screaming at her. The hospital administrator initially hesitated about releasing security footage, citing privacy concerns. "This is evidence for a court proceeding," Adelina pushed back. "We can get a subpoena if necessary, but time is of the essence. 2 hours later, we had the footage. Me walking slowly down the corridor, head down, shoulders slumped. The posture of a man devastated, not enraged. Better still were the nurse's notes Adelina somehow obtained. Father appeared shocked upon seeing infant, remained quiet during interaction, adjusted infant's blanket before departing room without incident. No raised voices or concerning behavior observed. When we returned to court 3 days later, Fatima wouldn't meet my eyes. Her attorney looked uncomfortable, shifting papers nervously as Adelina methodically presented our evidence. "Your Honor," Adelina said, "what we have here is not just an absence of evidence supporting Mrs. Harrison's claims, but overwhelming evidence directly contradicting them." She gestured toward the screen where the hospital footage played. "This is not a man in a violent rage. This is someone experiencing profound grief." The judge watched the footage carefully, then reviewed the nurse's notes. "Additionally," Adelina continued, "Mr. Harrison's brother's testimony and phone records confirm they were speaking on the phone at the exact moment Mrs. Harrison claims Mr. Harrison was threatening her in the hospital room." The judge removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Mrs. Harrison, do you have any response to this evidence?" Fatima's attorney whispered something to her, but she shook her head slightly. "No, Your Honor," her attorney answered. "We're prepared to withdraw the petition." "That won't be necessary," the judge replied. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm dismissing this restraining order." She looked directly at Fatima. "And I'm noting in the record my concern about potentially false statements made under oath." Relief washed through me like a wave. I didn't even realize how tense I'd been until my shoulders finally relaxed. As we gathered our things, Fatima brushed past me toward the exit. For just a moment, our eyes met. No tears, no pleading, just cold calculation. This wasn't over. That evening, Giselle brought takeout to Zach's house. The three of us sat around his kitchen table, containers of pasta and garlic bread spread between us. "To small victories," Zach said, raising his water glass. Giselle smiled. "And to the truth coming out." For the first time in weeks, we actually laughed. Not from happiness, we were still in the middle of a storm, but from the brief respite of having survived another attack. My phone rang just as we were clearing the table. Adelina's name flashed on the screen. "Zeke," she said when I answered, "the DNA results are in. We need to meet tomorrow." I sat across from Adelina in her office the next morning. My hands clenched so tight my knuckles had gone white. The morning light slanted through her blinds, casting stripes across the polished desk between us. She held a sealed envelope, her expression carefully neutral. "Before I open this," she said, "I want you to prepare yourself for either outcome." I nodded stiffly. "Just show me." She broke the seal and pulled out the report, scanning it quickly. Then, without a word, she slid it across the desk. The document was full of technical jargon and charts, but my eyes locked onto the only line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. I exhaled heavily, a weight I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly lifting. My hands trembled slightly as I set the paper down. "This is what we needed," Adelina said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "This proves conclusively that you have no biological connection to the child. You won't be placed on the birth certificate, and legally, you have no financial responsibility." "It's really over?" My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "The paternity question is settled," she clarified. "We still have the divorce proceedings and property division, but this removes the biggest complication. The judge will see this at today's hearing." I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself to feel relief for the first time in what felt like forever. For one brief moment, I remembered bringing Fatima breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee and cinnamon toast, her sleepy smile. That life was gone now, replaced by lab reports and legal strategies. "What happens next?" I asked. "We present this to the court today. With this evidence, we'll request immediate divorce proceedings and a ruling on the house and finances. 3 hours later, we sat in the courtroom. Fatima occupied the table across the aisle, the baby carrier beside her. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. Behind her, Thomas and Beth Foster sat in stony silence, deliberately distancing themselves. The judge entered, and we all rose. After settling in, she reviewed the DNA report carefully, then looked up. Based on the conclusive DNA evidence presented, this court finds that Ezekiel Harrison is not the biological father of the infant in question, she declared. Mr. Harrison will not be placed on the birth certificate and bears no legal responsibility for child support. I heard a small gasp from Fatima, quickly stifled. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the circumstances, the court finds grounds for divorce proceedings to commence immediately. Until final property division is determined, Mr. Harrison is granted temporary exclusive use of the marital residence, and all joint accounts shall remain frozen pending further review. Adelina touched my arm lightly, a subtle reminder to maintain composure despite the victory. The judge set dates for the divorce proceedings and adjourned the hearing. As we gathered our things, I overheard Thomas Foster's low, bitter voice as he leaned toward Beth. She's destroyed her entire future with one stupid night, he muttered. And for what? Beth simply stared ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Fatima rose, clutching the baby carrier, and approached the judge's bench. But, Your Honor, where am I supposed to go? What about temporary support while— Mrs. Harrison, the judge interrupted firmly. The court has made its ruling. You may address any additional concerns through your attorney. With that, she left the bench. Outside the courthouse, Adelina handed me a set of keys. These are yours. The locksmith changed them this morning as ordered. Thank you, I said, feeling the weight of the keys in my palm. For everything. We're not done yet, she reminded me, but this is a significant step. I drove home alone that evening, the radio silent. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked different somehow. Sharper, clearer. The house keys felt heavy in my pocket, symbols of the first taste of freedom, of reclaiming something that was rightfully mine. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal from the outside. The same lawn, the same walls, the same roof. But when I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I froze. The living room was stripped bare. The couch, coffee table, television, and bookshelf, all gone. Even the curtains had been torn down, leaving only the bare rods. In their place were scattered empty boxes, crumpled packing paper, and footprints in the carpet. I stood in the doorway of my half-empty house, keys dangling from my hand, realizing with perfect clarity that while I'd won the battle in court, Fatima had launched a new offensive. The war was far from over. I walked slowly through the half-empty house, footsteps echoing against bare walls. The living room, dining room, and master bedroom had been picked clean. Furniture, electronics, even most of the cookware gone. Fatima had been thorough. She'd taken anything of immediate value, though I noticed she'd left things that required effort. The washing machine, the refrigerator, the heavy oak dresser I'd refinished myself. What she had left behind was a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. I thumbed through it. Credit card bills, utility notices, a department store catalog. I opened the top envelope. It was a credit card statement with a balance of over $5,000. I recognized the account. It was a joint card we'd opened for household expenses. Unbelievable, I muttered, flipping through the pages. Charges for baby furniture, designer maternity clothes, and even a weekend getaway at a spa resort in the final month of her pregnancy. The doorbell rang. I set down the statement and opened the door to find Adelina standing on my porch, briefcase in hand. I came to assess the damage, she said, stepping inside. Her eyes widened as she surveyed the barren living room. She's been busy. Took everything she could carry, I confirmed, leading her through the house. Left the bills, though. Adelina moved efficiently through each room, making notes and occasionally taking photos with her phone. In the kitchen, she picked up the credit card statement I'd been reading. "This is actually helpful," she said, scanning the pages. "These purchases during her pregnancy, charged to joint accounts. The judge won't look kindly on this." She settled at the kitchen table, spreading documents across the surface. "Let's draft our terms for the divorce settlement. With the paternity issue resolved and this evidence of financial misconduct, we're in a strong position." For the next hour, we worked through assets, debts, and property division. When she finally packed up her briefcase, Adelina paused at the door. "The final hearing is in 3 days. Be ready? Fatima's lawyer will try anything to secure some financial support." After she left, I wandered back to the kitchen and stared at the refrigerator. The magnets that once held grocery lists and movie tickets were gone, leaving only faint outlines in the dust. Across town, Fatima sat in her lawyer's office, the baby fussing in her arms. Her attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as she pleaded her case. "There must be something," she insisted. "Spousal support, temporary alimony, anything. I can't afford daycare on my own." "Mrs. Harrison, the court has already determined that your husband is not the father," her lawyer explained patiently. "And your spending history doesn't help your case. My parents have refused to provide character reference," the lawyer finished. "I've reached out to them twice. Your father was quite clear in his response." Fatima's face crumpled. She looked down at the baby, now sleeping against her chest. Tiny fingers curled into fists. 3 days later, we faced each other across the courtroom again. Fatima looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. The baby wasn't with her this time. Adelina presented our case methodically, laying out the evidence of Fatima's financial misconduct. She displayed enlarged copies of credit card statements on a presentation board. "Your Honor, during the pregnancy, when Mrs. Harrison knew the child was not her husband's, she charged over $12,000 to their joint accounts," Adelina explained. "This includes nightclub expenses, hotel stays, and baby furniture for a child she knew was not Mr. Harrison." The judge reviewed the statements carefully, then glanced at Fatima, who stared at her hands. "Additionally," Adelina continued, "Mrs. Harrison removed approximately $20,000 worth of furnishings from the marital home, despite the court's order freezing assets." The judge frowned. "Mrs. Harrison, do you have an explanation for these expenditures and the removal of property?" Fatima's lawyer tried to argue hardship and emotional distress, but the judge remained unmoved. "I'll review the evidence and render my final decision on Monday," the judge announced, closing her folder. "Court is adjourned." That night I sat at my kitchen table eating Chinese takeout from the container. The house felt cavernous around me, each empty room a reminder of what had been lost and what had never truly existed. Zach arrived with a measuring tape and notebook. "Let's figure out what you need," he said, already measuring the living room dimensions. "Couch, TV stand, coffee table to start." I nodded, grateful for his practical approach. While he worked, I wandered into the bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf was a box of photos I'd forgotten about. I pulled it down, opened it, and found our wedding album. The photo on the first page showed us beaming at the camera, her white dress gleaming, my arm around her waist. We looked happy. We looked real. I closed the album and whispered, "Tomorrow ends this." The courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations when I arrived on Monday morning. Adelina stood near the front row, tablet in hand, reviewing notes one final time. She nodded when she saw me approaching. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied, straightening my tie. The wooden bench creaked as I sat down. Across the aisle, Fatima entered with her attorney, carrying the baby in a carrier. She looked exhausted, hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. For a brief second, our gazes met before she quickly looked away. I remembered how we used to practice presentations together before big meetings at work. She'd time me, offering suggestions on my delivery. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. "All rise," the bailiff called, as the judge entered the courtroom. Judge Peterson took her seat, arranging files before her. "We're here for the final hearing in Harrison versus Harrison," she announced, scanning the room. "I've reviewed all submitted evidence and testimony. Are both parties present?" Both attorneys confirmed we were. "Mrs. Harrison, you've requested spousal support and division of marital assets despite the court's prior findings regarding paternity," the judge began. "Please approach and make your final statement." Fatima handed the baby carrier to her lawyer and walked to the podium. Her voice quavered. "Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake," she said. "But abandoning me during childbirth was cruel. We built a life together for years. I'm asking for support while I get back on my feet, for the sake of my child who needs stability." Her eyes welled with tears. "I don't have family support. I have nowhere to go. I'm begging the court for compassion." The judge's expression remained neutral. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison." "Ms. Ruiz?" Adelina approached the podium with measured steps. "Your Honor, Mr. Harrison did not abandon Mrs. Harrison during childbirth. He removed himself from a situation where he had just discovered devastating deception. We've provided sworn statements from multiple witnesses." She held up documents one by one. "From Giselle Harrison, who was present at the hospital and observed her son's dignified exit after learning the truth. From Zach Harrison, who received his brother that night and can attest to his emotional state. From Thomas Foster and Beth Foster, the respondents' own parents, both of whom testified that their daughter deliberately concealed the paternity issue from my client for 9 months. Adelina paused, letting the weight of these testimonies settle over the courtroom. "Furthermore, we've documented Mrs. Harrison's financial misconduct during pregnancy, charging expenses related to her infidelity to joint accounts, and subsequently removing property from the marital home against court orders. The child is demonstrably not Mr. Harrison's, as confirmed by DNA testing. There is no legal basis for ongoing financial entanglement." The judge nodded. "Thank you, counselor." She looked between us for a moment before speaking. "I've given this case considerable thought. The evidence before me shows a marriage irretrievably broken through admitted infidelity. DNA testing has confirmed Mr. Harrison is not the father of Mrs. Harrison's child, removing any legal obligation for child support." She shuffled papers before continuing. "The court grants the petition for divorce. Mr. Harrison shall retain ownership of the marital home, all savings accounts, and investment portfolios built during the marriage. Mrs. Harrison, your legal name is hereby restored to Fatima Foster. You will retain ownership of the vehicle purchased solely in your name and the furnishings already removed from the marital home. All joint accounts will be closed. This ruling is final." The gavel struck with a sharp crack. Just like that, it was over. I exhaled slowly, feeling an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Adelina squeezed my arm gently. "Congratulations," she whispered. "It's done." In the hallway outside, I stood gathering my thoughts when Fatima approached, baby carrier in hand. Tears streaked her face, leaving trails in her makeup. "Zeke," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We can fix this." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. The woman I'd built dreams with, now a stranger holding another man's child. "No," I said quietly. "You chose this. That child deserves honesty, and my name isn't part of your lie." Her eyes searched mine, looking for some crack in my resolve, some opening to squeeze through. Finding none, her shoulders slumped. As she turned away, Thomas and Beth Foster walked past, their faces rigid masks. They didn't acknowledge their daughter, didn't offer to help with the carrier, didn't pause to look at their grandchild. They simply passed by, leaving Fatima to walk out alone. I watched her retreating back, the woman who was no longer my wife, carrying a child who was never mine, walking toward a future she'd created for herself through her own choices. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I sat on my back porch, coffee mug warming my hands against the early morning chill. The sun painted the yard golden, highlighting the flower beds I'd finally gotten around to weeding. My yard, my house, my life, again. I took a slow sip, savoring the bitter warmth. Amazing how something as simple as morning coffee on your own porch could feel like victory after months of chaos. The sliding door squeaked open behind me. Mom stepped out, wrapped in one of my old college sweatshirts, her own mug steaming in her hands. "Beautiful morning," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "It is." We sat in comfortable silence, watching birds flit between the trees. Mom had been staying weekends since everything settled, helping restore order to the emptiness Fatima left behind. "The library looks good," she said finally. "Zach did a nice job with those shelves." I nodded. Better than I could have done. What had once been the nursery, painted soft yellow with a crib we'd assembled together on a Sunday afternoon, was now a quiet sanctuary. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with books I'd always meant to read. The rocking chair remained, but now it faced the window instead of where the crib had stood. Sometimes at night, I still woke up thinking about that room, about how close I'd come to having a life built on lies. I'd walk down the hall in darkness, stand in the doorway, and remind myself that truth, however painful, was better than comfortable deception. "Zach said he'd be over later to help with the deck boards," Mom said, interrupting my thoughts. My brother had thrown himself into helping me rebuild, spending weekends replacing the things Fatima had taken or repairing what she'd left damaged. "He doesn't need to do that," I said. "He wants to." She reached over, patted my hand. "That's what family does. The real kind." I remembered when Adelina had stopped by 3 days ago, manila folder tucked under her arm. "Last of the paperwork," she'd said, stepping into the living room where I'd finally replaced the couch Fatima had taken. "Case officially closed. Your record's clear, accounts are separated, and the house deed is solely in your name." She'd smiled, satisfied with a job thoroughly done. "How are you holding up?" "Better," I'd told her. "One day at a time." Adelina had nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And Fatima?" I'd shrugged. "Haven't heard directly. Word is she's in that apartment complex on Westbrook, working double shifts at some call center." What I didn't mention was what else I'd heard through mutual friends: how Fatima was drowning in daycare costs, how she'd been spotted at the pawn shop selling jewelry, how she'd taken out payday loans to cover the car payment. Thomas and Beth Foster kept their distance from their daughter, too wounded by public humiliation to offer help. The grandchild they might have once doted on was instead a reminder of shame. They'd been seen around town, heads held high as if nothing had happened, but never with Fatima or the baby. "You know," Mom said now, pulling me from my thoughts, "I'm proud of you." I glanced at her, surprised. "For what?" "For handling this with dignity. For not letting bitterness consume you." She looked out at the yard. "For rebuilding, instead of just burning it all down." I thought about that as we finished our coffee, about how close I'd come to letting rage take over, how tempting it had been to lash out, to make Fatima hurt the way I had hurt. But in the end, I hadn't needed to. The consequences of her choices had done that work without me lifting a finger. That evening, after Mom left and Zach had helped replace the rotted boards on the deck, I locked up the house. I walked through rooms that were slowly becoming mine again. The living room with its new couch, the kitchen with half-empty cabinets I was gradually refilling, the office where I'd removed our wedding photo from the wall, leaving a lighter square of paint that I hadn't yet covered. I stopped at the window overlooking the backyard. My yard. The grass needed cutting, but that could wait until weekend. I had time now. Nothing but time and quiet, and the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Across town, Fatima Foster sat in a cramped apartment, probably counting dollars at a scratched table, juggling bills she couldn't pay. The baby that wasn't mine cried in the background while she calculated how many shifts she needed to cover rent. This was the life her betrayal had built. Struggle, isolation, consequence. Here's what I learned through all of this. Betrayal never requires forgiveness. It demands consequences. When someone turns your love into a lie, you don't owe them understanding or second chances. You owe yourself the dignity of walking away and rebuilding something honest. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.